The Subcommittee on Consumer Protection and Commerce will now come to order. We're going to hopefully move pretty quickly through opening statements because we're going to be called to the floor before too long for a long series of votes, and I really want to hear our witnesses. You know, the American people are often skeptical of what does government do for them, and I just feel so proud and so lucky to be on this subcommittee, because the kinds of things we're talking about today are about saving lives, that we're actually going to make a difference in the lives of everyday Americans. I appreciate so much our witnesses for being here today. We're going to consider 7 bills that aim at protecting consumers and, yes, saving lives. This subcommittee's vice chair, for example, Tony Cardenas, introduced the Safe Sleep Act of 2019, which would ban inclined sleep products. You know, I wrote to the chairman of the Consumer Product Safety Commission, Chairman Burkle, in April, asking to recall this rock and play, which gratefully she did. But there are other inclined sleep products out there that are a risk, so I'm very grateful to Congressman Cardenas for introducing this important legislation. I want to thank Annie Custer, who has waved onto the subcommittee today. She and Buddy Carter, a member of this subcommittee, has introduced the Nicholas and Zachary Burt Carbon Monoxide Poisoning Act. Those are 2 brothers who died. And we want to prevent that, and this would establish CPSC grant program for states to install carbon monoxide detectors in child care facilities, senior citizen centers, and homes for low-income families or seniors. Mike Thompson and David Joyce, who, though they don't serve on this committee, have introduced an important bill that we'll be considering, the Portable Fuel Container Safety Act, which would direct the Consumer Product Safety Commission to establish a mandatory standard for flame mitigation devices in portable fuel containers. Doris Matsui and Morgan Griffith introduced the Safer Occupancy Furniture Flammability Act, otherwise known as SOFA, which would adopt the California standard for upholding furniture flammability, which would, the standard for upholstered furniture flammability. I have introduced 2 bills. The first is the Sturdy Act, which would direct the CPSC to enact a mandatory standard to prevent furniture tip-overs. Every hour of every day, common pieces of furniture like clothing storage units, dressers, and chests tip and tilt and fall. And unfortunately, according to the CPSC, tip-overs inflict around 3 injuries per hour in the United States, and we're going to hear worse today from Crystal, from Ms. Ellis. In 2020 alone, over 2 million units of children's products faced recall, and nursery furniture was the leading category. CPSC rulemaking cannot move fast enough. In the last 10 years, the CPSC finalized only 1 mandatory safety standard. We certainly need to speed that up, and in the meantime, we need to pass legislation. The second bill that I've introduced this week with my friend from Chicago, Congresswoman Robin Kelly and Congressman Bobby Rush, is the Safe Cribs Act, which would ban crib bumpers. The American Academy of Pediatrics Safe Sleep recommends that infants sleep on flat firm surfaces and does not recommend the use of crib bumpers. Families need that right now. So I'm going to recognize our ranking member who has introduced an important piece of legislation, the FASTER Act. I'm sure she'll talk about that, and I recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome, everyone, to the Consumer Protection and Commerce Subcommittee hearing. Today marks our first legislative hearing, and we're here to discuss important issues for people's safety. I want to thank Chair Schakowsky for her leadership to keep the lines of communication open. We've talked a lot about the importance of bipartisan work, which is why I was surprised by the majority's action leading up to the hearing. Regarding my bill, it was my understanding that to speed up the fast-track process, recall process, that it would be considered as a discussion draft, as we continued our negotiations. However, this week, our staff was informed that the ENC will not consider staff drafts for legislative hearings. So I was a bit bewildered when yesterday the Health Subcommittee did just that with the No Surprise Act. As all members can appreciate, finding out hours before a deadline that a bill needs to be introduced does not give us the time to incorporate the feedback, find bipartisan co-sponsors, or do any of the proper work required to introduce a bill. All of that said, I did quickly introduce my bill before today's hearing, and I'm committed to finding a bipartisan consensus to improve it. I'm glad the majority, and I'm grateful that the majority is including it today for consideration. A bipartisan approach moving forward not only gives our solutions their best chance to become law, it also gives the public the best chance of seeing results that keep them safe. The CPSC's mission is to protect people against risk of injuries and deaths associated with consumer products. And while we cannot protect everyone from every harm, it's our job to address substantial hazards without creating too many opportunities for dangerous workarounds. For example, one of the bills today deals with crib bumpers, and it's critical that we examine what states have done in this space. We don't want to create the risk of parents putting blankets or pillows, which poses suffocating danger, back in the crib because they can't access safe mesh bumpers. Earlier this Congress, this subcommittee held an oversight hearing with Acting Chair Buerkle and the 4 commissioners of the CPSC. Chair Buerkle is steadfast in her efforts to advance the safety mission of the agency. And once again, I urge my Senate colleagues to confirm her. The CPSC, though small in size, has a broad jurisdiction over more than 15,000 products that are used every day in our homes, schools, businesses. Recently, we've heard concerns with the slow speed of the existing fast-track recall program. In some cases, recalls are taking several months. In fact, Mr. Samuels highlights examples in his testimony that prove why we should speed things up. Examples like a 2-week approval process for recall press releases, debating the exact phrases on social media posts, or requiring toll-free numbers, which may have made sense in the 90s when Fast Track was created, but not anymore. The Fast Track recall program is intended to protect people by encouraging companies to come forward with dangerous products so they can work with an agency. But like many things in Washington, D.C., Fast Track is now slow because of an outdated bureaucracy. It's a program from 1995 that isn't functioning today. As a result, some companies have bypassed it completely, leaving the CPSC out of the process. So it's time for an update. And it's important to maintain the connections between the CPSC and good actors in industry, especially when it means removing hazardous products from our homes to keep our kids out of harm's way. That's why I've introduced the Focusing Attention on Safety, Transparency, and Effective Recalls, or the FASTER Act, H.R. 3169. My solution will make fast-track work in the 21st century by giving consumers notice more quickly when a company submits a specific recall plan, and by learning from the company-initiated recall processes at NHTSA and the FDA. It allows a business to notify the commission of a recall and directs the agency to promptly issue a notice. No more press release delays, no more hang-ups over toll-free numbers. For parents who own dangerous baby cribs and rockers, for households with appliances that are a fire risk, For our children with toys that are a choking hazard, these bureaucratic delays cannot happen. The FASTER Act will get these products out of our homes and off the shelves as quickly as possible, and will still give the Commission the flexibility it needs to ensure a company remedy is right and, if necessary, to initiate its own recall. And make sure that when something goes wrong, there's a process in place for that recall to happen, and I hope that we can work in a bipartisan way to find a solution. There's many other important issues, such as the portable fuel container safety standard. I had the chance to sit down with Ms. Ellis and the issue of the tip overs. I appreciate everyone being here today, all of the witnesses, and look forward to your testimony and working through all of these issues. And I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Pallone, chairman of the full subcommittee, for 5 minutes for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. 2 months ago, the subcommittee discussed whether the Consumer Product Safety Commission is fulfilling its mission of protecting consumers. When CPSC is at its best, it's working proactively to eliminate hazards and adopt strong safety standards. But as we heard from many of our witnesses and even some commissioners, CPSC has not been at its best lately. To put it simply, we're here today to discuss important consumer protection legislation that is necessary because CPSC has not done its job. CPSC has let industry set its own rules, and the results have been predictably disastrous. Fisher-Price designed, marketed, and sold the Rock and Play Sleeper, a product whose intended use went against the advice of pediatricians. It received an exemption from CPSC's mandatory safety standards and helped write the voluntary standard that it followed instead. A decade later, Fisher-Price admitted that it was aware of at least 32 infants who had died in the product and agreed to recall all 4.17 million Rock and Play Sleepers. A similar product from Kids 2 was recalled as well, after at least 5 deaths were reported. CPSC knew about the dangers and incidents well before the recall, but didn't take action. These recalls were announced shortly after this subcommittee scheduled an oversight hearing of CPSC, and after CPSC inadvertently provided Consumer Reports with details of the infant deaths in these products, which it had previously refused to disclose. So it should not take a congressional hearing or an accidental disclosure of information to get a deadly product off the shelves. This is CPSC's job and should be their top priority. We're also here today because even when CPSC wants to act, its process for issuing standards is so tedious that years and years will go by before any standards are in place. Kids and consumers simply cannot afford to wait that long. A bipartisan majority of the Commission agrees that a mandatory standard for furniture tip-over is necessary, but getting a rule in place would take years due to CPSC's complex rulemaking procedures. Nearly every safety rule CPSC has issued over the last decade for other products use a streamlined process that Congress authorized under the Bipartisan Consumer Product Safety Improvement Act. So today we're considering bills that would direct CPSC to follow a similar process to address hazards from furniture tip-over and portable fuel containers. Product safety is not a partisan issue, and I'm pleased to see that a number of these bills are supported by both Democrats and Republicans. Passing these bills will get safety standards in place faster and save lives. I look forward to working with my colleagues to quickly move them forward. But Congress should not have to pass a law telling CPSC to address every dangerous product that's on the market. If CPSC's authority doesn't allow it to respond quickly and completely to new hazards, we should consider revising that authority. Now, I have a couple of minutes left. I'd like to yield one to Mr. Cardenas and then the second one to Representative Custer. So we'll start with yielding to Mr. Cardenas for 1 minute. He's here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to thank Chairwoman Schakowsky for bringing this important hearing to order. This week I introduced H.R. 3172, the Safe Sleep for Babies Act, which bans the sale of inclined sleep products such as the Fisher-Price Rock and Play. I introduced this bill because babies have been dying unnecessarily since 2009. They've been dying because companies decided making money was more important than putting infants' lives in danger. And because the regulatory agency charged with protecting Americans decided to be puppets for industry and stood by as more precious lives were lost, was the Consumer Product Safety Commission waiting for a higher body count before deciding to take action? I don't know. There's plenty of blame to go around, but on one major failing I see is that of the CPSC. And even with 2 recent recalls, these products made by other companies are still available on the market. As a grandparent, it's just appalling. I think that we should be putting children's lives before profits, and we have a lot of work to do. And with the limited time, I'd just like to say thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
And I yield now to Ms. Custer.
Thank you, Chairman Pallone and Chairwoman Schakowsky, for convening this important hearing today. As a mother of 2 boys, I know there's nothing more important than keeping our children and loved ones safe. From a young age, we tell children to be careful crossing the street, to always wear seatbelts, and to handle sharp objects with care. Yet there are some threats that our loved ones cannot see. One of the most dangerous is carbon monoxide, which is the leading cause of accidental poisonous deaths in the United States. So I appreciate today's hearing discussing my bill, H.R. 1618, the Zachary and Nicholas Burt Carbon Monoxide Poisoning Prevention Act, which I introduced with my Republican colleague, Representative Buddy Carter. This legislation incentivizes states to pass laws requiring carbon monoxide alarms in schools, homes, and commercial lodgings, and creates a grant program to install carbon monoxide alarms in low-income and elderly housing. It will save lives, and to that end, I seek unanimous consent to enter into the record letters of support for the Carbon Monoxide Prevention Act from the Security Industry Association and Safe Kids Worldwide. And I yield back my time.
Without objection, we'll put that information into the record.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And now I'd like to recognize ranking member, Mr. Walden, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to say good morning to you and everyone on the committee and to our witnesses today. We appreciate and will benefit from your testimony as we discuss these bills in the first legislative hearing of the year for this sub. This hearing is important for a couple of reasons. First, I think the opportunity to discuss the bills under consideration and the policies to improve the safety of products and keep kids and consumers safe. This is a goal we all share. And second, the opportunity to talk directly to the public about the risks and how they can make sure that they're taking steps to protect themselves and their families. I'm grateful that Representative Rogers has introduced your bill, Kathy, because as we'll hear again today, the Fast Track Recall Program for good actors who just want to get information to their customers faster has slowed down a lot in recent years, and we really do need to find a solution here, and I think we can and will. I understand there's a lot of bipartisan support for this proposal, and I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about it. In April, we heard directly from the CPSC commissioners and a number of interested parties about ongoing product-specific issues at the agency, as well as ways in which we can improve some of the agency processes. We've heard from many stakeholders about concerns with the existing Fast Track Recall program at the agency. It exists, too, as the title of this hearing suggests, to keep kids and consumers safe. That's the goal. By removing potentially hazardous products from the marketplace as quickly and efficiently as possible. And it does not apply to just 1 or 2 products. It applies to all 15,000 product categories in the CSPC's jurisdiction. So as I mentioned earlier, the Fast Track program has slowed greatly from unnecessary layers of bureaucracy that in the examples we'll hear today do not add substantially to the benefit of consumers. And further, delay for weeks, if not months, when consumers are told about potentially dangerous products. If a company wants to recall a product, shouldn't we be encouraging them to work with the CPSC and not go around the agency? So I think the answer is clearly yes. This is why I appreciate the work of Ms. Rogers that she's put into the FASTER Act to solicit comments and ideas on how to improve this previously award-winning recall program. This bill creates a process that removes the unnecessary red tape, slowing down recalls today. It mirrors programs that are already working at the FDA and at the NHTSA, NHTSA. As I indicated earlier, we're committed to working on the bill with our colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and I think we can find a bipartisan solution to this critical issue. So I want to applaud Ms. Rogers for her thoughtful approach and for helping advance safety. I urge my colleagues on the committee to support H.R. 3169 as we move forward. One last point I'd like to make is to take this opportunity to reiterate my strong support for Acting Chair Buerkle to be confirmed by the Senate as chair for her new term at the CPSC. She is well positioned to lead this critical agency and has demonstrated her commitment to protect consumers throughout her career of public service. So I'm hopeful that our Senate colleagues, who I'm sure are dialed into our hearing today and hanging on every one of our words, will act so we can get a chair there and confirmed. And with that, Madam Chair, thanks for your leadership on all of these consumer product safety issues over the years. I know it's a great passion of yours, and you've saved lives as a result of your work, and we want to be partners moving forward. So with that, unless anyone else wants the remainder of my time, I'd be happy to yield back.
I thank the gentleman for your kind words, and the gentleman yields back. I'd like to remind all members that pursuant to committee rules, all members' written opening statements shall be made part of the record. And now it's my honor to introduce the witnesses today, starting right to left. Let me introduce Mr. Will Wallace, the Manager, Home and Product Policy from Consumer Reports. Ms. Crystal Ellis, founding member of Parents Against Tip-Overs. I especially want to thank you for being here today. It would have been your son's 7th birthday, I understand, today. I want to thank Mr. Chris Parsons, president of the Minnesota Professional Firefighters Association. We thank you so much for traveling here. Mr. Charles Samuel, who is a member of Mintz Law Firm. Thank you for being here. And we absolutely look forward to the testimony. At this time, the chair will now recognize each of the witnesses for 5 minutes to provide their opening statements. Before we begin, I just want to make sure I explain the lighting system. Most of you probably understand, but in front of you are a series of lights. The light will initially be green at the start of your opening statement. The light will turn yellow when you have 1 minute remaining. Please begin to wrap up your testimony at that point. The light will turn red when your time has expired, particularly because of the press of votes that are coming up. I hope you will abide by that. And again, if you don't mind, I'm going to start right to left. Mr. Wallace, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairwoman Schakowsky, Ranking Member Rogers, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to be here on behalf of Consumer Reports, the independent nonprofit member organization that works side by side with consumers for truth, transparency, and fairness in the marketplace. The Consumer Product Safety Commission is a critical agency with an indispensable public health and safety mission. It plays a significant role in protecting U.S. consumers despite lacking the appropriations, staff, and authorities it would need to carry out all that it is capable of doing. But we are here today because the CPSC and many manufacturers have failed to protect our children and families. They failed 2-year-old Camden Ellis of Snohomish, Washington, 2-year-old Connor DeLong of Lakeland, Florida, and in total, at least 206 children since the year 2000 who died under the weight of a dresser or other clothing storage furniture, despite manufacturers being able to build a more stable dresser at the same price point. As we document in detail in our written testimony, tip-overs are a hidden hazard. They send thousands of people to the emergency room annually, yet people often do not know the danger, and dressers are particularly deadly. CR's thorough 2-year investigation, including safety research, testing, reporting, and a survey of consumers, has found that industry's current voluntary stability standard is inadequate to protect children, and a far stronger mandatory standard is both feasible and necessary. The CPSC and industry failed 5-month-old Ezra Overton of Arlington, Virginia, and in total at least 37 infants who died in inclined sleepers like the Fisher-Price Rock and Play, marketed as a safe solution for weary parents. That's a product that never should have been on the market, but was, because of an industry-driven carve-out from the CPSC's strong bassinet standard. The entire idea of an inclined sleeper conflicts with American Academy of Pediatrics' safe sleep recommendations, and the product category should be eliminated. While we welcomed the recalls this spring that have occurred, these particular recalls are not likely to be especially effective at actually getting the products out of homes. The CPSC's steps to protect infants have repeatedly fallen short. Only an erroneous data release to CR, about which we published stories revealing these deaths, allowed the public to know the breadth and severity of the danger. And for too long, the government and manufacturers have failed the victims of crib bumpers, fires involving portable fuel containers, carbon monoxide poisoning, and those who were injured or killed by other kinds of consumer products. We need a CPSC that puts the safety of the American public first and is funded and empowered to do so. We need consumer products companies with strong safety cultures that know that if they step out of line, they'll have to face an active and empowered agency. But right now, we don't have either. That's why it's so important for you to take the opportunity you have before you to support the Sturdy, Safe Sleep, Safe Cribs, Portable Fuel Container Safety, and Carbon Monoxide Poisoning Prevention Acts, which will at least show that you put the safety of American children and families first. You also can reject the FASTER Act in its current form, which would further disempower the CPSC and give recalling companies more control over life and death decisions regarding recall implementation. As members continue to work on that legislation, in particular, we would recommend speaking with those who have significant experience from the consumer advocacy and consumer safety side with respect to the recall implementation at the FDA and at NHTSA. There are some significant concerns with how that works. Over the longer term, you have the opportunity to reshape the CPSC to eliminate provisions like Section 6B, which could easily have kept many of the inclined sleeper deaths hidden if not for the CPSC's data release that occurred in error, and to require much more proactive action to put safety first by CPSC leadership and companies alike. Finally, while not on the agenda for today, we urge you to support efforts to strengthen the appropriations and staff that the CPSC receives. Your children and families, your constituents, have had enough of this failure. Every one of them, all Americans in fact, deserves so much more than they are getting today when it comes to the safety of their homes and the products they buy, and we look forward to working with you to protect them.
Thank you for your testimony. Now I introduce Ms. Ellis. You are recognized for 5 minutes.
Hello, my name is Crystal Ellis. I'm an elementary educator, mom, child safety advocate representing Parents Against Tipovers, an organization of families like mine who have lost a child to furniture tipover. I want to begin by saying thank you to each and every one of you for allowing me the opportunity to speak today. Today is a very difficult day for me. Today would be my son Camden Ellis's 7th birthday. But tragically, he was killed 5 years ago on Father's Day in a furniture tip-over incident. His 3-drawer, just 30 3/4 inch tall dresser fell as he tried to reach inside to get his clothes, trapping his neck between the drawers and suffocating him. He was unable to cry for help, and we did not hear it fall. His father found him when he went to get him up for breakfast. I can still hear my husband's screams. After trying my best to revive him with CPR and 4 days in a coma at Seattle Children's, we had to say goodbye, donating his organs to hopefully save another family from our fate. At the time, I thought this was a freak accident, and I had no idea that this was a danger in my home. When I discovered that he was not only the 7th child to die because of the negligence of this particular manufacturer without a recall, but that children were dying at the rate of 1 every 10 days from furniture tipovers, I was absolutely devastated. How is this possible? I had taken multiple getting ready for baby classes and child-proofed my home. None of the professional educators, healthcare providers, mom group leaders, or parents had ever told me about the risk of dresser tipovers killing my child. I know that there are many other parents in this country that also have no idea that their dresser is a risk. They assume, as I did, that any product that is sold in the United States of America has been vetted and tested by their government and would not be sold if it could kill us. 1 death every 10 days is a crisis that needs to be immediately addressed. It's already been 5 years since the death of my son Camden, over 14 years since the death of Kim Amato's daughter Megan Beck, the earliest death in our group, and not enough has been done to keep children safe today. I believe a mandatory standard that takes into account real-world use by a child with dynamic testing would have saved my son. We need the STURDY Act for many reasons. The first is the lack of progress in working with manufacturers to get them to do the right thing. Consumer advocates and parents have been trying for almost 2 decades to strengthen the standard. Manufacturers know how to solve this problem right now by engineering the tip-overs right out of the design. PAT members continue to attend meetings and task groups ready to dive into improving the standard, but by multiple accounts and measures, this is one of the most contentious subcommittees, F1542, overseen by ASTM. They have stalled for years on addressing the furniture tip-over issue. They keep saying, we need more data. Their data is our dead and injured children. We do not need more data. Even with the devastating statistics we already have, we also know the data is underreported. Most consumers do not know who the CPSC is or the importance of reporting incidents of faulty products to them. Every dresser that falls at the rate of 1 ER visit every 17 minutes has the potential to be a death or a life-altering injury. Even with the chairman of the CPSC strongly urging these manufacturers to stop stalling and take immediate action to increase the standard, there were still dozens of negative votes at the last ballot. Some manufacturer members of the ASTM subcommittee have argued we should make the current voluntary standard mandatory, but we know the current standard's not enough. Proof of this exists in the IKEA Hemnes dresser, which currently meets voluntary tip-over standards. It was responsible for the death of 2-year-old Connor DeLong in Florida and was seen in a viral video falling on 2-year-old twin brothers in Utah, both in 2017. We're also concerned that the creation of a mandatory standard from the current weak voluntary standard will make it much more difficult to make the standard strong enough to protect consumers. Secondly, the CPSC, even though they've expressed that tip-overs are their #1 highest priority this year, are still not using every tool available to them, including Section 104 rulemaking and recalling every dresser that does not meet the current weak voluntary standard. Also, from participating in the ASTM meeting on May 10th, I strongly feel the manufacturers are not afraid of repercussions from the CPSC. Between their small budget and their hands being tied by the limitations from Section 6B of the Consumer Product Safety Act, the manufacturers know they have time to stall, time that will result in more deaths of children. Today, Parents Against Tip-Overs is here to be a voice for our children who've lost theirs, a voice for parents who are home today acting as full-time caregivers for their children who survived a tip-over incident but have been left with life-altering injuries, and a voice for parents who cannot find theirs because they're overwhelmed by the darkness of grief and sadness that we've all experienced. I'd like to make it clear that furniture tip-over is not a partisan issue. I assure you, furniture falls on both Republican and Democratic children equally. Unstable furniture does not discriminate. Thank you again for allowing me to speak today, and I hope you will join me in protecting children and families in this country by supporting the STURDY Act.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. I think you're an American hero, and I appreciate your testimony. And now I am happy to introduce Mr. Parsons. You're recognized for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman Schakowsky, Ranking Member Morris, McMorris Rogers, and members of the subcommittee. I am Christopher Parsons, President of the Minnesota Professional Firefighters. I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you on behalf of the International Association of Firefighters, General President Harold Schaperger, and the over 316,000 firefighters and emergency medical personnel who comprise our union. I serve as captain with the St. Paul, Minnesota Fire Department, and have seen firsthand the unfortunate results of lax consumer safety laws and enforcement in my community. And action on these issues impacts not only the public, but also injures firefighters. I testify today to the fact that the federal government can and should do more to help prevent tragedies and the loss of health and life, and offer my full support for SOFA, the Portable Fuel Container Safety Act, and the Nicholas and Zachary Burt Carbon Monoxide Poisoning Prevention Act. In 2018, firefighters and paramedics responded to nearly 1.5 million working fires. With each response, firefighters were exposed to large amounts of flame retardants. Once thought to provide a measure of protection, flame retardants were placed in furniture to meet an outdated 44-year-old standard, unfortunately proved to be toxic when on fire. According to numerous scientific studies, firefighters are dying from cancer at an alarming rate. Studies by NIOSH and others have found that firefighters have an increased risk of dying from cancer as compared to the general population. We know that when burned, flame retardants emit cancer-causing furans and dioxins into the air. A study of firefighters' blood after working fires found levels of furans and dioxins more than 100 times higher than the public. We also know that flame retardants are not only toxic, but also ineffective. One study concluded that fires involving furniture treated with flame retardants only provided 3 extra seconds of escape time, while producing twice the amount of smoke, 7 times the amount of carbon monoxide, and 80 times the amount of soot compared to non-treated furniture. The toxic soup inhibits occupants' escape from a burning building, adding further risk of injury and death. Given their toxicity and suspect value, we see no reason to continue the use of toxic flame retardants. The IAFF is pleased to endorse SOFA to make California Technical Bulletin 117-2013 a national standard, replacing an outdated open flame test which led to the use of toxic flame retardants in furniture with a more modern, realistic smolder test. The 2013 California standard reduced the presence of flame retardants, lessening the harmful impacts suffered by firefighters exposed to such chemicals. By passing this bill, Congress will extend these protections to firefighters nationwide. The IAFF also supports the committee's efforts to update fuel container standards. Each year, approximately 450 burn victims will succumb to injuries sustained by a preventable phenomenon known as flame jetting. Flame jetting occurs when flammable vapors escape from an open nozzle and are ignited, creating an explosive flamethrower-type blaze. I have witnessed flame jetting at a fire. The initial fire was located on the exterior deck of a house, but the jetting flame caused an immediate increase in the fire's intensity. The jetting flame from a portable fuel container on the deck shot through a doorway into the interior of the house and turned a relatively uneventful fire into a prolonged and sustained attack, causing significantly more damage than would have been expected from the original fire. For as little as 25 cents, manufacturers of portable flammable liquid containers can add a flame arrestor to prevent the rapid release of vapors that cause flame jetting. The Portable Fuel Container Safety Act would direct the installation of flame arrestors in all containers manufactured to hold flammable liquids. Finally, the IAFF is pleased to support the Nicholas and Zachary Burt Memorial Carbon Monoxide Poisoning Prevention Act. Each year, carbon monoxide poisoning results in more than 20,000 emergency room visits and 400 deaths nationwide. In 1995, Minnesotans Nicholas and Zachary Burt tragically died in their beds as a result of carbon monoxide poisoning. Like the Rochester firefighters that responded to the Burt's tragic incident, I too have witnessed the deadly effects of carbon monoxide firsthand when responding to a St. Paul senior citizen who had passed away from carbon monoxide poisoning. Fatalities like these are avoidable with the installation of an inexpensive working carbon monoxide detector in the home. Despite the clear dangers of carbon monoxide, many people remain unaware of the need for carbon monoxide detectors. This bill aims to change that. It will assist states in delivering public education on the dangers of carbon monoxide poisoning while simultaneously providing grants to purchase and install detectors in the homes of elderly, the low-income citizens, and schools. In conclusion, I and the International Association of Firefighters express our support for these 3 important public safety bills, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. I think as first responders that we think all firefighters are heroes as well, so thank you. And Mr. Samuels, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chair Schakowsky, Ranking Member Rogers, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the invitation to testify about the CPSC Fast Track Recall Program. I'm Chuck Samuels, and I've practiced CPSC law for 35 years. The work of this small agency is critical to the safety of Americans. The vast majority of industry rightfully considers product safety a preeminent value. Companies design and build products to be safe. Sometimes their efforts fail, and recalls are required. Thank you, Representative Rogers, for introducing H.R. 3169, the FASTER Act, a thoughtful start to improving Fast Track. Fast Track incentivizes companies to quickly remove unsafe products from the marketplace and consumers' homes. Fast Track is a significant innovation. Unfortunately, it has become ossified. It should not be allowed to languish. It should be revitalized. To participate in Fast Track, a business must be prepared to implement a corrective action plan, including a consumer-level recall within 20 working days of submitting a Fast Track report. The firm must immediately stop sale and distribution of the product. About 1/3 of corrective actions have been fast tracks. The program also provides benefits to firms. By removing the product from commerce quickly, the potential for injuries and product liability claims is reduced, and CPSC will not make a preliminary determination that the product contains a defect that creates a substantial product hazard. A fast-track corrective action plan includes a remedy, a joint news release with CPSC, other customer-level communications, communications to the distribution chain, and a reverse logistics plan. This is a significant amount of work and requires major planning by the company and others. It also requires, and here is the hang-up, timely review and approval by the CPSC. If that review is not forthcoming, then all components of a corrective action plan languish, and the fast track is no longer fast. What I have seen over the years is the process slows down considerably because of prolonged examination and back and forth, both internal and between staff and firms, regarding the components of the recall, and especially the press release or other communication. This emphasizes one-size-fits-all over the need for quickly getting safety information to consumers. Because Fast Track is no longer fast, some companies are bypassing it and opting for the conventional approach at CPSC, working with Health Canada more quickly than CPSC, or announcing the recall on their own without CPSC. This situation is not the fault of any particular CPSC administration or staff, but rather the natural bureaucratization of a program, an agency concern that it not be criticized. I have seen delays due to additional information requests, long CPSC reviews of data, and non-substantive back and forth about press releases and other communications. Whether through lack of resources or internal sign-off requirements, this can take weeks. I've also experienced significant delays in the recall announcement due to additional information requests and customer notification letter revisions, which were not substantive. None of these minor agreements are worth lengthy delays. The FASTER Act speeds up things. If a company provides the required information, then the Commission shall promptly post the notice on the Commission's website. The bill has safeguards. If the Commission obtains information that the remedy provided in a recall is inadequate to address the product hazard, it will investigate. This should be very rare because companies have an interest in ensuring the success of their recalls. This legislation is informed by recalls under FDA and NHTSA. They do not micromanage recalls, and their approach is successful. We must make sure that the bill language doesn't result in the premature public posting of information about a recall before the company is ready to launch. It is frustrating and creates anxiety among consumers to learn about a recall and then have to wait for lengthy periods before they can receive appropriate relief. We also need to make sure that we are not providing the Commission such great discretion that companies will fear that they'll have to undertake multiple recalls. This would freeze the program. The thrust of the FASTER Act is that the necessary information can get out to consumers quickly, and consumers can act as part of the recall or on their own to protect themselves and their families. If the company has proposed a remedy that is unsafe, then of course the Commission must have the authority to protect the public. I hope the subcommittee will use this bill as a basis for engagement with all the stakeholders, including the CPSC. Undoubtedly, alternative language will be offered, which we will need to consider. Thank you, and I'd be very pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Samuels, and thank you for being within the time to appreciate that. We have now concluded the witness opening statements. For our first panel, we now move to member questions. Each member will have 5 minutes to ask questions of our witnesses. I'll start by asking some questions. Ms. Ellis, again, I just can't thank you enough. It takes great courage for you to be here. What I wanted to have you elaborate on is why can't we just rely on voluntary standards that are being developed? 2 parts, both the standard itself and also the voluntary part of that. Love your comments.
Thank you. So to address the issue of a voluntary standard, first and foremost, the voluntary standard that we have currently is still allowing children to be injured and to die. Connor DeLong is an example, and the twins in Utah are another example. I'm so grateful that they are okay, but it shows that the standard is not okay. Secondly, voluntary standard, to be honest, isn't even wanted by industry. The compliant industry folks want a mandatory standard so that other people, other industry members will be held accountable and held to the same standard. So it's something that we do agree on, which is a mandatory standard. We just need to make it tougher than the current voluntary standard.
Thank you. I know you now have a group. How big is the group of parents that have lost children?
Well, our founding membership started with 9 parents. However, we are growing and we continue to grow. And there are so many parents that we represent the voice of that may never be in a place to advocate, that are too broken by this tragedy to use their voice.
Let me ask you this. Have you heard from any of these people, both the members of your group and people you've talked to, that there was any hint whatsoever that this was a dangerous product?
No one knew. No one knew. And it didn't matter what the price point of their dresser was. We've had very expensive dressers kill children. We've had cheap dressers kill children. It's across all demographics, and no one knew. No one knew.
Mr. Wallace, Consumer Reports has done a lot of testing on furniture to learn more about how to prevent tip-overs. Can consumers tell if a dresser will tip over by looking at it or even manipulating it in some way?
No. Consumer Reports investigation found that there is no easy way for consumers to tell whether a dresser is more or less likely to tip over just by looking at it.
This week, I introduced the Safe Cribs Act, which would ban crib bumpers. Crib bumpers pads have been banned in Chicago since 2011, and for good reason. Crib bumpers are inconsistent with the safety standards as been talked about by the professionals, by the doctors, who for years have recommended that babies sleep in baby cribs free of clutter. The City Council approved the ordinance in response to investigatory news stories that found federal regulators receive reports of babies suffocating for years, but failed to do anything about it. Again, Mr. Wallace, what are your thoughts on banning crib bumpers?
It should happen. I mean, crib bumpers are not, they contribute to an unsafe sleep environment. The American Academy of Pediatrics is clear in its thorough policy statement developed over the course of years, looking at the medical evidence, that a baby should sleep on its back in its own space, on a flat surface, a firm and flat surface that has nothing else in there, no added bedding, and the baby in its own space. And that's why it's critically important not to have these products out on the market, because we suspect there's a lot of confusion out there. Right now, parents may even think that these are necessary for the safety of their babies, but that's not the case anymore. There used to be, under the old crib standard, the gaps between the slats were quite wide. Today, products manufactured to the new standard, it's narrow, and a baby's head can no longer get entrapped between the slats as a result. Therefore, these products not only create a danger to children, but they're also unnecessary from a safety perspective.
You know, we've done a lot with cribs. There's no longer, I remember with my kids, the drop side cribs. And so it seems that we need to go a step further here. I appreciate all of our witnesses, and now I'd like to recognize our ranking member, Ms. Rogers, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to say thanks for holding this hearing today so that we can learn and dig into these issues more deeply. As most of you know, I am an older mom. I have 3 young children now. They're 12, 8, and 5. I remember Brian had some friends who had lost a toddler when a bookshelf fell over on him, and Brian has been paranoid about the tip-over furniture in our household. Being a parent is the best thing that's happened and also the hardest thing that has happened. And I too want to just say thank you, especially to the parents, for the courage and the advocacy, taking what is unimaginable grief and becoming advocates so that all of us across this country can learn and then take action to make sure that we're doing everything possible to protect others. So I want to say thank you, Crystal. I want to say thank you to Margaret that I see in the audience, and others that are advocating so that we can figure out how to get this right. Captain Parsons, I want to say thank you for your service and highlighting so many issues important to firefighters and also as we try to protect people from the danger of fire. Mr. Wallace, on my legislation on the FAST Act, I would just encourage you to let me know what you think needs to happen so that we can make the fast track recall program actually work. That's the goal of the legislation, and my goal is to make it bipartisan and so that we can actually get it done. Mr. Samuels, your testimony certainly highlighted some around the fast call recall program, and since that's the bill that I am advocating for this morning, I just wanted you to take some time and highlight some of the examples on how the process has slowed and what's caused the delays.
Thank you very much. Where you have a situation where the company recognizes that there must be a recall, then you want to get out to the public as soon as possible when you're ready to announce the recall. That's the whole genius of the Fast Track program, which was developed by career employees at the CPSC 20-some years ago. It was recognized actually by Vice President Gore with an Innovation Award. But over time, what has happened is, as with many things in a regulatory environment and bureaucracy, they've fallen into patterns. The programs become ossified and stultified. They want to have exactly the same press release. They want to have everybody follow the same path for a recall. Wording changes in press releases, changes in the communications to consumers or to distributors or retailers. They've got certain formats, they insist on it. Sometimes they ask questions or try and impose requirements when you really should be getting out to the public and announcing this recall. So that's what the problem is. And your bill is a great starting point for a discussion about what we can do so that we can, when companies are ready, make these announcements as soon as possible.
So to be clear, the CPSC has other avenues under current law to investigate companies and conduct recalls, right?
Absolutely.
Right, and this bill would not impact those authorities?
Not at all. The basic requirements for filing under Section 15 of the Consumer Product Safety Act is untouched. Most recalls probably will continue under the conventional process, and if a company uses the fast track, even now, but certainly under your bill, and their remedy is inadequate, they don't do a good job in repairing the product or replacing it with a safe product, or they don't accurately describe the products that need to be recalled, then CPSC has the authority now, and it would have the authority under your bill to require possibly a second recall.
Okay, thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize Congresswoman Blunt Rogers for Rochester for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you so much to the panel. A special note of thanks to the parents and especially Ms. Ellis. Before coming in, we had the opportunity to talk, and I just want to say that on the 7th birthday of Camden, there's no better way to honor him than standing up for families and children across our country. So I just want to say thank you for that, and on behalf of Camden, happy birthday. When I thought about this issue and listening even to my colleagues, you hear the conversation about carbon monoxide poisoning. In Delaware, we had an actual father who experienced this with his son in a motel, a very famous person, actually. He was able to advocate and get help on the state level to get legislation. When we talk about sudden infant death syndrome, I remember as a parent, my children are 30 and 33, but at that time, we made bumpers for our baby cribs. We did things that we thought were the right thing to do. And I also thought about the tipping over, the same thing. And Ms. Ellis, you actually made a comment, and it wasn't in my script to ask this question, but you made a comment that many people don't even know what CPSC is. So they don't even know to go and get help or to find out if there's something that they need to be protected from. My question is to you and to the panel, can you speak to the lack of knowledge about CPSC and the implications, and then any recommendations that you would have? So maybe we could start with Mr. Wallace and go down.
Sure. I'll just very briefly say that when it comes to the tip-overs issue, when it comes to, so one of the most important steps that anybody can take in their homes if they have a large piece of furniture like a dresser is to anchor it to the wall. But at the same time, we've found through a survey of consumers, nationally representative survey, that it's just not an easy fix for most consumers. And many of them hadn't even heard of it. And so that's an example.
Right. Thank you. Ms. Ellis?
I will speak to the fact that not only did I not know what the CPSC was, I just assumed government protected me. I didn't know what specific agency, I just figured my government protected me. And then after Camden died, I spoke to Kathy about there are a lot of government agencies coming in asking you what you did wrong, what's going on. You have police, you have the hospital administrators, and then and I'm a law-abiding citizen, but I was terrified that my other child was going to be taken away in the interim until they could figure it out. Then the CPSC sends me a letter saying, we want to know all about your accident. Give me all of the details. And I went, no thanks. Yeah. Because it's just not, I don't know what your purpose is. I've never heard of you. And why would I want to tell one more government agency the most terrifying day of my life?
Thank you. Captain?
Chairwoman Schakowsky, Congresswoman Rochester, before I got involved in my work on phasing out flame retardants in Minnesota, I had very little knowledge of the CPSC and the work that it has done. It's extremely important work. We all lead busy lives, and we're not always able to digest all the information that is out there on products. But I remember as a child growing up in the 80s, when the big smoking initiative were occurring through the Surgeon General, we cut down on smoking among children. Perhaps we need another initiative along that lines because consumer protection is critical for the general public.
Thank you. And Mr. Samuels, I have about 40 seconds.
Well, let me just say that this agency is significantly under-resourced. That's the fault of the Congress. It doesn't have the capability to do the communications and education that it should. Its budget is vastly smaller than the FDA's, and it really needs the support of Congress.
Thank you so much. I will submit my other questions for the record, but I want to just thank you all for being here, and thank you for the leadership from Chairwoman Schakowsky and Ms. Rogers. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to tell everyone that's listening now, recall.gov. I'm sorry? Recalls.gov will connect you to a list of those products that have been recalled. And saferproducts.gov is a place to go where you can report if there are products that you've experienced as being unsafe. I just wanted to say that and recognize Mr. Latta for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, for calling today's hearing, and thanks to our witnesses for being with us today. And Ms. Ellis, thanks very much for your testimony. If I could start with my question with you, Mr. Wallace. While newer crib standards have narrowed the distance between slats to prevent head entrapment, I continue to be concerned about the limb entrapment for children. To prevent limb entrapment, several companies have manufactured and marketed mesh crib liners instead of the padded bumpers we're familiar with. Several studies looking at mesh crib liners have shown that there have been no fatalities or injuries treated in emergency departments and no incidents involved in the risk of suffocation. In the state of Ohio and several other states, lawmakers have recognized this data and excluded mesh crib liners from legislation that banned crib bumpers. If mesh crib liners are also banned along with the padded crib bumpers, my fear is that parents are going to start taking matters in their own hands and come up with different types of self-improvised solutions to prevent that limb entrapment. In your written testimony, you state that these products do not serve any safety purpose. Did you consider the mesh crib liners when you made your determination?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the very end.
Did you consider the mesh crib liners when you made your determination?
Padded crib bumpers, we know, are linked to suffocation, strangulation, entrapment. Mesh crib liners, there's just not a lot of data. They're pretty new products, and I think the Ohio law was wise in recognizing that the question needed to be revisited after a period of time. Right now, it's carved out from the Ohio law, mesh liners, but the law charges everybody to come back after, I believe, 2 years and revisit the state of the evidence.
Okay. But now, have you conducted any tests or anything like that at Consumer Reports on those?
We have not tested mesh liners or crib bumpers that are padded.
Intending that in the near future, or?
We don't currently have plans. We don't think that they are consistent with a safe sleep environment. We think that a bear crib is best, and that we want to make sure not to confuse anybody about that or to send any mixed messages, because it's critical to get that message out, as we have since the 80s, that bear is best. A bear crib, bassinet, or play yard is best, and it's critical not to put anything extra in there into the infant sleep environment.
Thank you. I could ask my next question. You, Captain Parsons, thanks very much for everything you do out there. And I'd like to focus on H.R. 806, which is the Portable Fuel Container Safety Act, which I'm also a co-sponsor. And again, this legislation will require the flame mitigation devices or arresters to be used on portable fuel containers for those flammable liquid fuels. It would also allow for a voluntary standard to be considered as the consumer product safety rule if it meets the intent of the bill and other requirements. Captain, could you go into more detail and describe the different types of flame arresters that are available on the market today?
Congressman Latta, could you repeat the question? I'm sorry, there were some...
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, sometimes those doors make a lot of noise. Could you go into more detail and describe the different types of flame arresters that are available on the market today?
Congressman Latta, I do not have information on the specific types of flame arresters. I'd be more than happy to provide that information to you at a later time.
Okay, I really appreciate that. And again, could you, I know you talked about it a little bit earlier, could you go again into the detail in discussing how the flame arresters prevent the flames from jetting out?
Congressman Latta, my understanding is that when a flammable liquid container ignites, pressure builds up in the container itself, and that then shoots flammable vapors out of the opening. This arrestor would keep the vapors from escaping through that opening, thus keeping a flame from shooting from the opening.
Thank you very much. And Madam Chair, I am going to yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. I'm now going to recognize Congressman Soto for 5 minutes. Let me just announce that on the clock, there is just under 4 minutes for a vote. However, 300, how many people? 364 people have not voted, so we'll continue with you, Mr. Soto.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And I'm just going to make a brief comment knowing that we have votes pending. It wasn't more than 2 weeks ago I had a Florida mom, Megan DeLong, come into my office from the Sarasota area talking about her child, Connor, who died due to a dresser that was not balanced correctly, and implored me to make sure to support the Sturdy Act. I know that we have also here today, we're joined by Crystal Ellis. Thank you for being here and fighting for our kids. Whether it's that, whether it's the inclined sleeper, whether it is crib bumpers or carbon monoxide detectors, or so many of the other great bills that are up today that we're workshopping, there's this sense, and it was said here, that people assume the government is doing something about it. But that's not always true. People assume that the agencies are doing something about it, and that's not always true. But that's why we're here today. And I thank you for your leadership, Madam Chairwoman, on having a workshop on these bills, because for every one of these, there's hundreds to thousands of stories of everyone from infants and young children to our seniors that are put at risk and, God forbid, pass away because of negligently built, risky products. So when people assume the government's working on it, this committee hearing today is evidence that we are, and that we're hearing these stories and these cries from across the nation. So thank you for that leadership.
If you would be willing to yield, then
Yes, I
to
yield back.
Congresswoman Kelly, the remainder or
Yes,
part
I
of your
yield to
time.
Congresswoman Kelly.
Thank you, Rep., and thank you, Chairwoman. Ms. Ellis, I want to thank you also for your testimony today. I'm deeply sorry for the unnecessary loss you and your family have endured. As you mentioned, the life-threatening hazards of unsafe household products such as dressers or crib bumpers can affect anyone and everyone. In my own district, the city of Chicago, as you've heard, has banned the use of crib bumpers, making every infant in Chicago safer and giving Chicago parents more of a peace of mind. However, only a third of my district is actually in the city of Chicago. Most live in the south suburbs, and then I have a rural portion. So putting another way, children in 2/3 of my district are at risk, just like your son. Parents in 2/3 of my district are burdened with homework to ensure their purchase is safe. And just, I wanted to ask a question. When we talk about education, all of you have talked about that education, beside like doctors or parents going to parent groups that are going to have children, or in your case, is it firefighters? Who should educate beyond government? I know we have our responsibility to do what we need to do, but what would you recommend so we do get to everyday people about what they should do?
Oh, for sure.
I really am glad to see that the American Academy of Pediatrics is backing the Sturdy Act. I think I've been saying with my pediatrician who had a tip-over story herself, she happened to be in the room with her 8-year-old when it happened, that, and I'm also working in Washington State with Child Profile to add risk of tip-over information to the packets that get sent to families. But sometimes people don't read those. So I think a conversation, especially with your pediatrician when you're going in for those well child checks, hey, have you looked at your dresser? Have you anchored it to the wall? Have you, considered all of the, different hazards in your home? It should be part of that conversation.
And Captain?
Congresswoman Kelly, when I first started working with the flame retardant issue, I was scratching my head, why would a firefighter be against flame retardants? And the more that I dug into it, the more education that I got from my union, the IAFF, and other colleagues in other states, the issue was very clear and very present in all of our lives. As firefighters, we were all affected. So as president of the Minnesota State Association, we took it upon ourselves to educate our firefighters in the state, because firefighters will listen to other firefighters. So that's how we tackle that. As far as consumer safety products, perhaps putting more of an onus on manufacturers and retailers to get it on the packaging. You know, you can't buy cigarettes without seeing that Surgeon General's warning front and center. So perhaps something like that, so where it's in everybody's mind. Thank you.
I yield back, and thank you, Chairwoman, for your vigilance.
Mr. O'Halloran, there's still 270 people that have not voted yet. Not that I want to promote delinquency when it comes to voting, but I wondered if you had something short that you wanted to present.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is short. As a former first responder, a police officer, Captain, we've seen a lot of death. Some preventable, some accidental. Mrs. Ellis's case, it was preventable. In many cases of young children dying, it's preventable. And what I heard a common theme here today is that the action that there is by agencies is too slow. The education process is needed to be gotten to a higher level. Mr. Samuels, you clearly indicated that the agency is underfunded, vastly underfunded. I believe it is, along with many other agencies that address the needs of the safety of our citizens. And there is a need, Ms. Ellis, you said there's a need to do more. It's critical that we do more. And it's also critical that Congress looks itself in the mirror and says, we need to do more. This idea that people look at agencies and say it's the agency's fault. The agency is only going to be as good as the people it hires, the supervision, and the amount of funding we give it to be able to do its mission. And so I'm sorry, Mrs. Ellis, that you have to be here today, but thank you for what you do. And I just, when it comes to education, we should understand that we're all of us are involved. I have 3 young grandchildren and a 4th one that's a little older. And when we go into the home, we always check to see if the straps are on, if the sockets are taken care of. And our children are too precious to us all. And if you've seen the trauma that the captain and I and others have seen, you can understand the relevance of making sure we get this done right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me close by saying, and again, to thank all the witnesses. There may be others who wanted to come back, but we're probably going to be on the floor for about 2.5 hours. So I wanted to thank you for being here. I want to put in the record a statement from Representative Mike Thompson, a statement from Safe Kids Worldwide President, a letter from the National Association of Manufacturers, a letter from, what does that say? Breathable Baby, LLC, a letter from the American Home Furnishings Alliance, an article from the Washington Post regarding inclined sleepers, a letter from Kids in Danger about, and the Consumer Federation of America, a letter from the Security Industry Association, a letter from Safe Kids Worldwide, without objection, so ordered. And I want to remind members that pursuant to committee rules, they have 10 business days to submit additional questions for the record to be answered by witnesses who have appeared. I want to ask each witness to respond promptly to any such questions that may arise. And just a final huge thank you. What you're doing today is saving lives. And with that, the subcommittee is adjourned. Thank you.